If you want to learn Blender, this tutorial is designed for you. We're going to build this factory environment from scratch, and in 15 parts you learn everything about how to work with Blender, and in the end you feel comfortable to create any kind of environment yourself. So we start with organizing the outliner. So from this point we can import the blueprint references, and we're going to align the cube with the reference. And this is very important that you take some time for this, because if you don't do the alignment in a good way, you get some problems later in the tutorial. So when your cube is matching the reference, we can start selecting the vertices and extruding it so it's matching the blueprint reference. Then we add another blueprint so we can focus on the top part of the roof. We simply extruding this, and now we have the rough shape of the factory. So next is selecting some faces of the roof. We're going to extrude them so we can create some triangle looking rooftops. Go to the edge selection mode, and now we can move them to the top, and you have some triangle roofs. We're now importing a third blueprint, and this one will help us to find the location of the windows in the factory. We're selecting these in the face selection mode, and then we extrude them so they are popping out of the factory. That looks very good. So when the modeling work is done for the factory hall, we're adding a remesh modifier, and this allows us to add vertex painting later in the tutorial, because we now have many more vertices to paint on the surface. To finalize the first part of this tutorial, we're putting the camera in position, we're changing the focal length so we have a wider perspective, and then we grab the point lamp to take a look how it all looks like. So in part 2 we start working with the materials. We're starting with the plaster one, importing textures from the free asset pack, combining the diffuse, roughness and normal map, so we can later on UV unwrap the factory. We're using a cube projection map so we cover all sides of the factory. We're doing a little bit of scaling and checking this in the material editor, and we can see we have to make it a little bit bigger, and then it looks all good to me. So we can continue. To add a new material on the same mesh, we first have to select the vertices on the ground, and then we apply this on the concrete material we need for this floor. And if we look in the material editor, we can see now both the plaster and the concrete floor. And you can do this for the concrete plates as well. You have to align this in the UV editor so it's matching the texture. You apply it on the mesh, and then you have concrete plates on your floor. And we also have to do this for the painted windows. We have quite a lot of them, so we need to align them piece by piece so they're fitting well on the texture. Then we also have a protected window, that's a different type. We align these, wrapping them up, and then you have two types of windows in your factory. And then we jump back to the camera, go to render mode, and you can see the sunlight shining through the windows in our brand new factory hall. And in part number 3, it's time to work on the construction beams. We import some blueprint reference, and then we take a look at some of the parts we're going to model. We import a new cube, adding an edge line, and then we use a mirror modifier to make the construction of the first big beam. We measure the beam with the blueprint reference so we have the right measurements. Then we apply a material. We switch to the next part. We have some tiny parts we all need to model for this construction. We also learned some new extruding techniques to add some details on the smaller parts. And when these are all ready, we can finally fit these small parts in the main construction. We have to rotate them and align them so they fit well. And on this part, I'm going to change the UVs for each part, otherwise it looks repetitive. You want to have a unique look. And if it's all done, you have a completed construction beams. We're going to make a duplication, so if something went wrong, we always have a backup. And then we can finally merge these construction beams in the factory on the top part. We make some duplications, so we have a couple of them. Then we go to the viewport mode, taking a look with sunlight, and they look nice and shiny. So we can move on to the next part. And then in the next part, we make concrete pillars. We start with making a rough sketch where we want to have these pillars. Then we model these and adding a nice bevel on these pillars, adding material. That's very important. and then we can align these pillars in the factory on the places where they need to be. And we also need some horizontal pillars. We're going to align these on the vertical ones, and when that's ready, we're going to align them all over the place. And because we work on construction, we also need some metal beams on the other part of the factory. So then it's done, we make a new render, and we can continue to the next part, and that is light trays. So we import a light tray model. It has 3 parts, and we start with the first one. We're using an array modifier that's now supported by geometry nodes, and we're aligning this in a straight line, and then we can align this with the concrete pillar. Then we jump over to the hanging system. We have to do the same thing. We're going to use an array modifier and aligning this on top of the other part. We have to extrude the lines a little bit so it matches with the construction beam. And then it's time to align the lamp model. We have to put it in position using the array modifier, and then we're finished with this whole system. We're going to change the values a little bit so they're a little bit rotated. Importing an area lamp. We're going to fit these on one of the lamps. We're putting this in position, that's very important. When this is done, we can duplicate all the parts so we have multiple rows in the scene, and we're aligning these with the construction beams on top so they align well. And then it's done. You have your lights in the hull, and this gives you some more control on how to light your scene. All right, let's move to the next part. So for this factory environment, we also need some door models, and we're going to model these from scratch by using a blueprint. And starting with a large door, we're adding a cube and we're making this a little bit smaller. And we're adding some edge lines, and we're going to put these on the sides so we then can select the faces and extrude these. And we have to do some UV mapping on the materials and putting these on the lines. And we take a look at the door, and that looks perfect. So this door needs a gliding system, and for this we need to add this sidebar. We're focusing on it and we're adding some edge lines. We need this so we can select these faces, and we extrude them, and we focus on the mounting part. We use the spin tool to twist it around, and then we focus on the wheel and adding some little details. That looks nice. And then we merge the mounting so it aligns with the door, and then it's finished. Look at that, it glides. So then we move over to the smaller door, and it works a little different because it has some smaller details. But that's okay, it just works a little different. We're making a door handle, doing some material work and reusing the protected glass, and then it's all done. We can just merge this in the factory hall, and look at that, we have a large and a small door, and it looks nice. So now the concrete floor needs some love, and we're adding a color ramp and a noise texture. We have to find the right value, so we have this water puddle, and then we add some fine detail so it looks better. And we take a close look at the water puddles. It needs some extra work, so we have to fine tune it a bit. And then we add some extra wetness around the water puddles. We're putting these puddles also on the other material, and then it's done. We have a very wet factory. Let's move on to the next part. So after adding some viewport colors, it's now time to do some Vertex painting, and because we made a remesh of this model, we can paint everywhere on the mesh to add these fine little details to add some dirt on the corners. We also add a second UV map, and this allows us to add some graffiti paint on the wall. And we're doing the same thing for the larger door. The only change here is that we flip it to white paint. And then it's done. We have some graffiti paint and dirt on the wall. Let's move on to the next part. So we're starting by organizing one of the node trees a little bit more, and also adding a color so it's easy to recognize. Jumping back to the concrete, doing some Vertex painting and adding a little bit of grunge. And we paint this on other places as well, so we have more dirt on the concrete. I also like to improve the light a bit more, so we're changing the rotation value of the sunlight, and then we import our fog box. We have to apply a material that allows a volume scatter. We're starting with a lot of fog, but we bring down the value so it fits the scene a bit more. So at this point we start adding some of the main props, and starting with the shelf. We need quite a lot of them, so we have to take some time for this. And using an array modifier to align them next to each other, making a duplication. And we import the container. It's a very big prop, and putting this close to the wall. And we're also having an IBC tank. It's a small prop, but it fits this room very well. So we're making a new render, and we're slowly getting there. So I like to continue by adding an area light behind the doors because currently it's very dark, and by adding a light you add more depth in the scene. We move on also in the pillars, we're adding a little bit of displacement, and you can see it's now a broken part at the bottom. And because these pillars look very clean, we're going to wrap some safety tape around it. First we need to align the texture, and when this is done we're going to align this tape around the pillar using a shrink wrap modifier, making that smooth. And then making a duplication for the other pillar, we align this and we consider this done. So I like to add some metal scrap in the scene, and this cast comes with large and small scrap. We'll make a selection of the small, and Blender 5 now has preset geometry nodes, and this makes it very simple to scatter your scrap around in your scene. So we're using Vertex paint to have full control on where we want to locate this scrap, and we can slowly paint around where we want it. For example, we also want to have some scrap around the container. So after scattering the metal scrap, it's now time to put some larger props manually in the scene. Like this metal bar, we can put it in position where we want it, and this pallet, we can put it in the shelf, and that looks really good. Now we have a barrel, and it fits very well if we put it close to the pillar. And then we have some tires, putting them on top of each other, and we have a safety pawn, and that looks good for the entrance. So at this point I like to rotate the sunlight, and this adds some more depth in the scene because we have some light streak on the foreground, and we make a final tweak on the water puddles so they look a little bit better. So we're almost finished. The only thing we need to do is adding more and more props, these barrels for examples, but I also like to align the camera a little bit better so we have a better perspective. And we're adding some of these cans, we're aligning these close to the wall, and some cans on a pallet. That always looks smooth and nice. So after adding a viewport color on the props, we move forward to add a fire extinguisher. We're putting it on the pillar with a fitting decal that we put on top of it. And then we also add a fire exit sign on top of the doors. So a factory without electricity is a bit weird, so we import this asset pack with electricity pipes. We're aligning these on the pillar, and we're making some duplication. And at the bottom we add this light switch. And we're doing the same thing for the plaster wall. We're making some duplication, and at the bottom we put this little light switch. And then I like to add some more detail on the concrete plates. We make this selection, and then we add some bird poop. Then we move back to the tires. We're adding some more dirt around it, and we're finalizing by adding also some more metal scrap close to the cans. And then we take a look at the render, and look at that, we're almost finished. We import the scanned boxes, and what I like to do with these is we're going to align some of the pallets, and then we go back to the boxes and we're putting these on the pallet. We're making some selections, and then we're taking a close look and we're trying to align these close to the pallet. And we're doing the same thing for the barrels. We're aligning these on the pallets, but we're also going to wrap them into plastic. So we add a cube, adding some edge lines, and then we add a material, this plastic wrap. Then we jump to the modifier tab and adding a shrink wrap modifier. And this wraps the plastic around the barrels. We're also going to drop a top on the barrels. That's a very nice effect, and you can put these in the shelves. And we can also change the material color into a transparent, and that works nice for the boxes. Now we're dropping all the pallets in the shelves. So most of the work is now done, and the only thing we need to do is some fine tuning and spending some time on compositing. So before we dive into the compositor, I like to make some final tweaks, like putting this hammer on the tires or this little wrench on the barrels. I mean, these little details finalize your scene. And we're also putting this exit graffiti on the plaster wall, and we highlight some of the dirt on the plaster. And we're also adding a bevel modifier, and this helps highlighting the corners when rendering the scene. I like to add a fisheye effect on the camera, so I change perspective to panoramic, and this adds this nice looking fisheye on the lens. But that's not all, we also have to do some compositing, like adding a glare together with some lens dirt, and we're mixing these together. We also add some chromatic aberration, and we finalize the effects with some vignette, just a little bit. And that's it for the compositing. And the final part is adding some motion to the camera, and we're doing this in two different ways. The first is manually, but we're also adding a very realistic effect. We're importing some camera motion, we are aligning the camera, and then we have real-time motion, and we walk around in this factory, and that is really awesome. So here's the final clip. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you're going to follow this tutorial. Bye bye.